Hello and welcome to the webinar organized by Mainstreaming Innovation Project here at Glasgow Caledonian University. My name is Branka Dimitrijevic. I will moderate today's webinar and I am also directing a project Mainstreaming Innovation. This project is a joint project of 9 Scottish universities and it is funded by Scottish Government. Just a few points about webinar management before we continue. If there are any interruptions, online interruptions, or if we hear fire alarm here, we will have to stop. But we will continue later, and then please do try to join us. If you cannot, we will save the video recording of this webinar on our website, so you can watch this webinar a few days later. You are very welcome to start using chat facility during the webinar at any point, but your questions will be answered after the presentation. I will just say a few words about our project, Mainstreaming Innovation. As I mentioned, it is a joint project of 9 Scottish universities, and its focus is on integration of low-carbon infrastructure systems into the built environment. We are interested to support collaboration between universities and Scottish businesses in developing innovations that link different infrastructures to achieve better efficiencies or to achieve cost efficiency. And as this slide shows, it is about using landscape and biodiversity as a green infrastructure, connecting it with how we use water, waste, looking into energy efficiency of buildings, technologies for that, energy generation from renewables, low carbon transport, and of course information communication technology and how it serves to monitor and manage these systems. If you need any research input for applications for EU, UK or Scottish funding programs, please do contact me and I will connect you with researchers at these 9 universities who can assist you in preparing applications or setting up consortia. So today's webinar is about post-occupancy evaluation, looking into justification, case studies and practice, and the potential for future alignment with government soft landings. And our speaker is Dr. Howard Jeffrey, who is Senior Innovation Manager in Skanska and BIM Support Officer. Welcome, Howard, and I would kindly ask you to start with your presentation.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Branka, and the invitation to do this presentation. Post-occupancy evaluation is particularly of interest to me personally. I've been looking at it for perhaps the last 8 to 10 years, and I now have 2 titles. One is Innovation Manager, so the ability to do post-occupancy evaluation within Skanska fits within that remit. And I also work part-time 2 days a week for the government BIM task group as what they call a BIM support officer, and we're trying to help government departments understand how best to implement BIM, of which I'll talk a little bit more later in the presentation. So the title is post-occupancy, and I've put in brackets there design evaluation, because there are a number of definitions of post-occupancy evaluation which can be rather broad, and within Skanska we wanted to look at whether our designs worked in practice, hence the qualification there. So it's really just how we've gone about it within our own company, Justification. I'll briefly mention a couple of case studies and the practice of how we do it, and then of course the government strategy has also said that they have to publicly procured projects have to implement what they're calling government soft landings by 2016. One of the key facets of government soft landings is post-occupancy evaluation, so it dovetails quite nicely. Now, I've deliberately put on the slides rather more words than I would normally do at a presentation, because I'm conscious that you will receive these slides, so rather than have 2 or 3 bullet points per slide and then in a few days time you can't remember what it was about, I've put as much detail as I think would flesh out what I'm talking about, and I'll try not to read every word from the slide, so it's not death by PowerPoint. So today's webinar is going to be about POE from the Skanska perspective. I shall give a brief history and the background and my personal understanding of post-occupancy evaluation, because it's hard to dig and find what everybody has ever done about POE, but there's enough there for us to justify our work within the company. The reasons why from the literature post-occupancy evaluation is thought to be cost effective, how we actually engage and do the process practically and what methodologies we've decided on, what the limitations are, and articulating the risks, because it seems on the face of it to just be a great idea to go and find out what buildings are up to and how they're performing. But there are all sorts of stakeholders who have different perceptions on what the information is and what's going to happen to it. And I'll touch on that. Just very light touch on a couple of projects that we've done. And then it isn't just the design that influences the performance of buildings, it's how people who occupy them use the facility, which can almost be much more important than what the design was in the first place. Some of the technical issues and their interface with building information modelling, BIM for short, without going too much into the technical detail because BIM is a huge subject in its own right. Touch on the rollout of the government construction strategy and level 2 BIM, and finally just how it interfaces with the government soft landings and potential alignment. So how do Skanska define post-occupancy evaluation? It's basically a structured exercise to interrogate the users of a building, and there are many users of buildings. There are the people who work within the structure itself, but there are also visitors to it, and there's also the people who have to maintain it. And the aim of the report is to assess whether the design performance has met the brief. And briefing and an understanding of what the original brief was is very important, really, because people can perceive a problem with the design of a building when in fact it's met the brief perfectly. It's just that they wish it was in some way designed differently. So you have to extricate that to get a really good balanced view. And then part of the report really is to identify what elements work well, because it's a two-edged sword, is post-occupancy evaluation, and people often forget that sometimes the designs are fantastic and they're just taken as a given. But capturing what works really well and making sure it's implemented on a similar project in the future is sometimes worth capturing. And then I've chosen my words carefully, those elements which do not work quite so well, and the aim really is to improve future designs. Just a little bit of a clarification note. It's not a post-project evaluation, which we also undertake, but that's really how the design and construction project went. It's not about that. It's a year, 18 months after the construction and design teams have left the project, so we can talk to the users about how the finished building is working. And then just at the bottom there, there's a definition by Blythe and Worthington in 2003 about what post-occupancy evaluation is, and that really fits in quite nicely with how Skanska have gone about it. So a very brief background and history to post-occupancy evaluation. Until 1972, it was part of the then RIBA stage plan of work. But it was deleted because it was never done. And Part M, which now covers feedback, was reinstated in 2006 because they recognised it was actually quite important and it ought to be part of the work. My own experience, and from what I can glean from authors and the literature, is it's very, very limited in practice for various reasons. Clients don't want to pay because a lot of them just have a one-off commission. And why should they pay for something that's going to benefit somebody else who they don't know in the future? And then designers are forward-looking. They're they're interested in designing the next project rather than necessarily looking back on the last one. However, if you set the stall out to do a post-occupancy evaluation, the designers are more than willing to come along and participate. But it's not like they can self-motivate themselves for various reasons, as much commercial as anything else. And then as far back as 1984, which is already 30 years ago, researchers Marvin and Mackinder were saying that many firms could do much more to encourage designers to revisit completed buildings. But I think that was a case of easier said than done. I think I've probably got 4 or 5 slides on the background of the history, really. So the thing which was current when I started to look into post-occupancy evaluation was an exercise called Post-Occupancy Review of Buildings and Their Engineering, and it was a government sponsored by the then Department of Environment and Transport, and they actually sponsored a research team for a period of 5 years before the funding was withdrawn. And I think with a lot of these government initiatives, they like to catalyse a little bit of initiative, and then they keep their fingers crossed that then it will have a momentum of its own. And with all these things, it rises, and then as soon as funding's withdrawn, we go back to the old ways. So the other important thing that was current, and it seems a long time ago now, 1998, but Sir John Egan was brought in, another high-level government research project really into what ails the construction industry. And one of the things I've extracted from his report was learning from how buildings perform in use and fine-tuning them to perform better remains central to the systematic improvement of the end product. And its construction industry has no objective process for auditing client satisfaction. I have a sneaking suspicion that still remains the case 16 years later. And again, Bordas and Way in the literature, this starts to come into the period when I was doing my research on it, 2004, state that POEs can show what works and what does not, yet they are not common and apparently have seldom been done in a systematic way. Even routine feedback is still rare, because feedback can take all sorts of forms, and it might just be designers talking to each other or talking to clients about previous projects they've done. And I've got some slides which illustrate at least my research, even how difficult that is, just talking about a previous project. And Bordas and Way speculated that we could change attitudes, which is one of the key things to improving any process, changing the process to attach feedback and follow through processes, so we can embed them in the recognised procurement procedures, finding the money to do it, because although I've said everybody benefits, most people benefit from it, but nobody wants to pay for it, and then making widespread use of the knowledge that's gained. Now I've got a couple of pie charts here. I won't go into the detail, you can look at that in your own time, but when I was doing my research in 2007, because I worked for a client organisation, it wasn't like I had the traditional difficulty of a student getting people to participate in my research. It was like I could pick up the phone and ring an architectural firm, and it was, when would you like to come and how many people would you like to talk to, which was fantastic. So I managed to interview probably about 50 very experienced and senior designers, and it was in particular healthcare design, of which I found when you analysed what they were saying to the structured questionnaire, only 12% of hospitals at the time had ever been visited for a review, which means that 88% of the buildings we were building have never been reviewed in terms of healthcare. And then the slide underneath that is about feedback. Only 37% of the projects that people had worked on had really had any recognised form of feedback to them. And I think the thing which certainly caught my attention initially was 25% of the designers at the time never ever talked about or communicated anything about a project that they'd been working on, which really struck a chord with me, that so many people would simply not think about passing on information. And then the number of people actually doing POE, I can't quite make that out, but it's around 80%, is it, of people have done no POE at all. So in 2007 there was very, very little POE being undertaken, and I still have no experience or reason to believe that the situation is much improved. So again, at the time of my research, I looked into the types of techniques, and these aren't necessarily all specifically POE. It's almost a pick and mix of some of the things that you could use in if you were doing a post-occupancy evaluation. Just sneaking in at the bottom there is soft landings, and I'll talk a little bit more about soft landings in a later slide, and how the government is now calling it government soft landings to differentiate from that. And then I have to say, in my own post-occupancy evaluations, I have to be very, very careful about the energy consumption, because one or two of our projects are PFIs where we have the responsibility for energy consumption, or the person that procured it has the responsibility for energy consumption, and we don't want to confuse culture and occupant behaviour with whether the design for the relative energy efficiency is being prejudiced. So it's a little bit of it's one of the risks and how we mitigate it that I mentioned earlier. So why do we do post-occupancy evaluation? It seems to be almost a given that doing post-occupancy evaluation is an obvious thing to do to get the benefits of it. So I've just trawled the literature to come up with some things which they've identified, and there are various writers, and I've got the names of a few on the next slide, I think. It's to support policy development, testing and evaluation of standards and design guides. Are they correct? Are they current? That kind of thing. Getting lessons from buildings in use back to the supply side, because if we don't know there are issues, we won't attempt to resolve the issues, so we'll just carry on as normal. Testing new concepts to see how well they work. We like to think we're an innovative industry, but sometimes not all the innovations work that well, and you need to know. Generating information to support major decisions. One of the things, again, that is really close to my heart, stop repeating past mistakes, because it's been my experience on projects which are very, very similar, where you have even the same people who are aware of issues that happened on previous projects. There is no mechanism to prevent them happening again on the next project, which really needs addressing. Improving the building performance over its life cycle, because although we're looking at the design and construction, it's a drop in the ocean compared to the ongoing life cycle costs of a building, which may last 50 to 100 years. Monitoring quality and functionality, and making the designers and particularly the owners accountable for building performance in the future, especially if we're trying to be environmentally friendly, sustainable, etc. And it also aids communication amongst stakeholders, and involves occupants actively in feeding into and evaluating the design process. If it were easy, post-occupancy evaluation would be undertaken in a widespread format, but some of the barriers that were identified, again, Blythe and Worthington in 2001, Albright 2002, and in America the Federal Facilities Council in 2003, and Board Aston Way, who I've quoted before, organisations have not created conditions for learning. We all like to think we learn, but I'm sure we could all improve how we pass information on. Obtaining it in the first place is key to that. One of the things about POE is its potential to expose failure, and failure is not rewarded, either in-house by politicians, auditors or the press. But appreciation, I think, is needed that there's nothing wrong with making a mistake. Where the wrong comes in is if we continue to repeat the same mistake and we don't attempt to rectify it. The link between positive outcomes and the built environment has not been demonstrated. At the time of the writers, I would like to argue that now we've got a few POEs on stream, people can actually immediately benefit from the findings. So we're addressing that one. And occupants are sometimes reluctant to participate. There's a fear that if a building owner invites people to talk about problems, once you've talked about them, they expect them to be put right, and that isn't necessarily what the purpose of the POE is. It's to improve future performance. Obviously, if we are maintaining the facility and we can, in the normal course of management, put something right that is part of the maintenance of the building, then we would do that. Procurement staff are too focused on future projects to spend time looking at the past. And organisations don't necessarily have enough in-house staff to get involved and are reluctant to commission outsiders. I'm in a little bit of a privileged position within Skanska is that in that I've been able to elbow the time and space to actually do some of these reports. And once you've got a stream started, it's a little bit more easy to perpetuate it. And I'll explain how we got started a little bit later. So again, the barriers, the information stayed within the project. Again, people don't talk about it. Organisational structures got in the way of dissemination. Government agencies often don't find the time and money to assist with the process. And clients, they think the building should be right on day one. That's what they've paid for, a design and construction that works. So that if they had to pay for a review, the benefits are likely to develop others if they're not a repeat commissioner of projects. So there is a bit of a barrier there. And the design and build team, who think they might be blamed for any problems unearthed, and there is an issue that there's some kind of black art associated with post-occupancy evaluation methodologies, and they're reluctant to embark upon it simply because it's almost like unknown. They don't know what's on the other side of the door. And then there are occupiers who think that just coming in and talking to people actually disrupts their day job, and they don't want to invite complaints. So that probably summarises the history and backdrop to post-occupancy evaluation and my understanding of it. So moving on now to how Skanska engaged with it. I was working for Skanska when it became apparent on the project that I was working on that we were designing a hospital, and we'd designed and built dozens of hospitals previously, but had we got the learning back from that? The answer was no. So I just decided to do one because, again, I was in the position where I could just manage and organise a post-occupancy review of a project that I'd been involved with, but for my previous employer. And probably one of the most difficult things in organising the post-occupancy evaluation was getting agreement to wash their dirty linen, or as they perceived it, in public, which I was able to overcome by suggesting that we would be prepared to reciprocate. If they wanted to send a team we would go around another of our hospitals and share the information, because we're trying to be altruistic about improving the industry, and it's not one company not sharing with another company. I have to say, they never took me up on my offer, which didn't surprise me. So within Skanska in 2010, we created what was called an innovation department, and we have a core team, of which I am one of them. And when we started, we had the idea of providing seed funding to innovative ideas. And I was able to convince people that doing post-occupancy was in fact innovative, simply because nobody did it. So I got seed capital, and it was a substantial amount of money. It was about £10,000 to actually just undertake 1 or 2 post-occupancy evaluations, and I got that funding through in 2011. And it wasn't a bag of money. It was just covering my time while I orchestrated the initiative. So I reviewed the existing methodologies to get to a point where I was happy with a kind of template, and I found that no one size really fitted all. I did actually create a template which was more of a pick and mix than a standard for every job, and it depends really on the process, the project, how far you want to go into it, and then you have to contact the stakeholders, and there's a broad range of people. There's the owners, there's the users, there's the design team, the contractor that built it, and various other people who would be interested in the post-occupancy report. You then have to agree an agenda, because you have to manage a day or 2 days of visits. It's not necessarily the whole day, but just to make sure people are all understanding what you're going there for and what to do. And that involved priming the discussion with the stakeholders to establish, first of all, the intent to improve future designs, the limitations, where you can go, because I've done a number of hospital projects, and of course there are a lot of sick patients in the hospital, so they don't want a huge working party traipsing round. And then the potential risks, which I'll touch on shortly. So you then have a working party and you visit the project. You take photographs, make notes, and then do a finalised report, which you pass around for everybody to put their sixpennyworth in and make sure nobody's being exposed unduly, and then you publish it. So the structure of the report really is you acknowledge the people who have contributed, and they're usually many. You summarise the report, because within a company like ours, the senior management wants to read the result in half a page, no more. So there's an executive summary which lists what came out of the report, good and bad. Fairly standard things on the template, which a summary of the background that I've just illustrated in the history, the limitations and the risks, and I'll touch on a couple of those shortly. And then you have to agree who's going to participate, because once you actually start to talk to people who are interested in post-occupancy evaluation, more people express an interest in participating than you could possibly entertain on the day of the report. So you have to attempt to get some feedback from everybody who wants to put their sixpennyworth in, and then have some spokespeople who represent them to keep the numbers manageable. And then you agree with the stakeholders what the agenda is, and I start off with a standard list of things and then invite people, because I don't necessarily know what's close to their hearts on any given project, and we have a flexible agenda to get what's important to as many people as possible, really. And then we record the observations, and sometimes it's if you have the designers with you and the person using the building, it's really interesting to listen to the interaction as to why things are of a certain way. And often people perceive a problem, but once they hear what the constraints on the design were, the problem goes away because they have an understanding of why we have got to that point. I've written conclusions. I used to say conclusions and recommendations, but I've put the recommendations in brackets because I decided it might be a little bit presumptuous of me to recommend solutions when I'm not necessarily involved in the design development process of the next project. So I can pass over the post-occupancy report and raise the issues which we found, and then it's really up to the design team to decide how best they address those. There are inherent suggested recommendations, but they're not under that particular title. And then there's always a space for appendices, because once you start to interrogate, it's surprising what other parallel streams of investigation people have undertaken, and it's useful to attach that as an appendix, even though it wasn't necessarily what we did on the day. So I'll just check. I'm about halfway through, and I'm about halfway through the time, so we're on target there. So defining the limitations and the risks. What we have to do is identify what the spirit of the review is, and that's to obtain feedback, both positive and negative, about the utilisation. I've said school here, but it doesn't matter. It's a hospital, it's an office, it's whatever facility it is. It looks like my slide is a victim of cut and paste there. This is so that future designs can give consideration to the observation and try and incorporate the good whilst avoiding the bad. A very important point when you're undertaking a post-occupancy evaluation is you've got to have at least a working knowledge of what the original brief was, because there's always a finite pot of money to do a design and construction of a project, and people who occupy the building when it's completed aren't necessarily aware of what those compromises and limitations were in the brief. Probably I've touched on this. Where people air an issue, they obviously perceive there's a problem, so they may expect somebody to come and rectify it. So they have to understand prior to the visit that, yes, please tell us what you think the problems are, but don't necessarily expect somebody to come round tomorrow with a bag of tools to fix it. So you have to manage expectations. The review, although it's semi-structured, it's not a forensic analysis of the performance in relation necessarily to contractual obligations, and observations are intended to generically assist the future design considerations. It's quite probable that you'll discuss issues where there isn't any better solution to the one that's on site. So it's always very interesting to talk about things like security, car parking, very emotive subjects on many projects where you think it should be different, but there is no way of getting a better compromise than the one that you've got. And as I've mentioned previously, just people having the opportunity to talk about it and understand what the limitations are, their perception of the problem then is much reduced because they've understood what the issues were. I've tried to engage the University of Reading to assist with the interpretation and dissemination of information, because once we have a regular stream of data coming on board, it requires somebody to look at that common data and do something with it. And it also took away the potential of us seeing to be the judge in our own cause. We have commissioned the design, we have built the project. Are we likely to expose our own shortcomings? Well, we ought to, as a serious player who wants to benefit from the future designs. So having a university associated with it took away that immediacy of us judging in our own cause. I won't go into any particular detail about the case studies that we've gone into, but we were able to look at our own head office. We did a major fit out. So I reviewed the fit out of our head office. We have one of our recently completed PFI hospital projects in Walsall, which we had an extremely good rapport with the users there, and so many of the users wanted to come and contribute to the post-occupancy evaluation. I actually had to change the format. I had to almost get a conference room so that we could entertain about probably 35 to 40 users who came in, and we had a really good structured discussion with the design team there. And then I had to reduce the number to maybe 12 to 8 who then actually walked to identify and photograph what they were actually talking about in the field. And then we've done a number of school projects, because the upshot is really we don't build these schools to necessarily house the pupils in a fantastic structure, which is obviously what we'd like to think we do. The outcome is really to improve education achievements, and you embark on how can the design help the education authorities achieve that goal. And unless you go back and start to interrogate how things could work to that advantage, then there is always going to be a gap in that respect. And the same with the throughput of healthcare. How do you improve healthcare service by design, and also the efficiency of people in offices, and in fact any constructed edifice? What's come out of the evaluations so far are some common themes immediately, so we can give more time to the development of them in future projects. One fairly obvious thing is just the understanding of the controls that the occupants have. That might be heating, lighting. We found that they don't necessarily know how to operate the controls, which they do have. They just assume they can't because the design has built such that the environment's taken care. But there is always got to be a little bit of user control. The durability of components is coming out. The temptation during design and construction is to procure what we think is more cost effective. Often it just means cheaper, and as often as not you get what you pay for. So there are issues with the durability of things like ironmongery and stuff like that. The accessibility of maintainable assets. When you're designing, you do think that you are taking the future maintenance into account, but only the guy who has to get into a ceiling space or a plant room with a bag of tools to do something with that asset, like replace a filter or something like that, he's the only one who really knows how much space he's going to need to be able to do that. And the number of times we've found where we've probably designed but then had to tweak during the construction. So sometimes it's been impossible to actually get a filter out, which needs to be cleaned regularly, without dismantling a whole raft of other things. And that's the ongoing construction alteration without recognising what the impact is going to be. Even though the design was right, the construction is subtly different. And sometimes it only means 10 millimetres, and you can't do something that was designed to be done. Another of the things, most buildings have some kind of building management system, and unless you know what the users and the facilities people want out of the building management system, you simply procure what you've always done, and then you hand over and disappear, and the facilities people are left with a building management system that doesn't do what they need it to. So bringing people in to make the observations about what they would like doing is really important, and POE highlights the usefulness of that, because although I say it and you may think, well, why don't we do that anyway? No, we don't. So occupational behaviour in relation to energy consumption. We can design buildings to be super efficient, but if people leave the doors, the windows open, the lights on, and equipment consuming energy, then the design is only as good as how it is then used in the future. And then we do find obvious design flaws which we can address. And the other thing that was common was really the enthusiastic engagement of the users. Without exception, on the projects that we've been back and visited, as I've said, more people want to contribute to the process, even when they know they might not necessarily benefit from it. The learning that they've got from the utilisation of the building, they really want to share that information if in the future somebody who does a similar role to them will be able to do it better. And that's a fantastic thing that you wouldn't have foreseen unless you start to do it. And then it's just a summary of good performance of the building by design and incorporating the feedback from it. So just a brief word about the social and behavioural perspective of it. I mentioned previously that that's why I've engaged the University of Reading. It's a big university with many schools. We have a particularly close relationship with somebody whose expertise is in behavioural and cultural change, and I think Professor Christopher Harty has been a guest lecturer at one of Branca's other webinars or conferences in the past. So he brings a different perspective from mine to the proceedings, which is always useful to have. So it's energy reduction in terms of understanding and utilisation of the controls, and sometimes these are just simple things like telling the users this is how you can actually operate the control systems, and just printing and distributing leaflets at handover is not necessarily enough, even when we do that, because in all these establishments staff come and go, and probably within a month or two they've forgotten you even handed them that. So some mechanism to keep them reminded of how best to use the controls is something to be looked at. Perceptions is another thing. Some people feel cold at 25 degrees, some people are sat next to them in t-shirts, some people are sitting way away from the draft from perhaps cooling systems where some people are sitting underneath them. That might not necessarily be a perspective, but some people aren't bothered by the draft. They think it's really refreshing, whereas other people, it invites them to think they will catch a chill. So it's a big problem for them. And I think one of the things I've noticed in my own working life is people expect to be able to work in short-sleeved shirts in an internal office environment. Well, if we were really serious about reducing energy consumption globally, why can't you just wear long sleeves or put a pullover on? Again, that is a cultural perception. The willingness to hot desk and working practices, because if you want to be innovative, you don't just tweak what you do around the edges. You may have to radically rethink how you use a space. And people are very territorial, they want their own working space, when in fact if you could just break that mould for the ones who can use a hot desk, because the experience from our own head office, only 50% of the desks are actually occupied at any one time, which means that we have 50% overcapacity in permanent desk space. So if we could get the ones who visit into the habit of using hot desks, which is easy for me to say, I've been in the habit of using hot desks for years. Somebody who hasn't yet broken that mould, it's a big step really from having your own permanent desk, even if you only use it one day a week, to actually coming in and finding somebody's moved your stuff from where you'd left it. But as long as there's this discipline as to where they move it to, then you could actually reduce the number of permanent office emplacements, therefore the scale of the office and all the efficiencies that come with that. At the moment, the focus is not necessarily on the environment when we're designing, so there are some real major initiatives that we could implement into the design if we're serious about environmental support. And then why would people change their behaviour? They like it the way it is, and everybody thinks they do things right now, otherwise they'd change. So there's got to be a reason or an incentive to behavioural change. So one of the things which I'll skip very, very quickly through is how do we interface post-occupancy evaluation with BIM? Within Skanska, when we have the report from the post-occupancy evaluations on all our projects going forward, we have to, at the front end, have what we call a BIM execution plan. So as part of that execution plan, we have to look at the reports from similar facilities. So anything that came out of it in the report has to be considered as part of our BIM process. One of the practical things that I found myself saying in some of the post-occupancy meetings is, well, actually now we're doing more and more BIM and using visualizations and engaging people at different parts earlier on in the process, basically. We can probably address some of the legacy issues in terms of access to assets and location of assets because we have the facility to engage with the facilities people and use the modelling process to design on paper in a model before we actually build the project. So we think we will iron out some of the legacy issues simply because we're moving more and more into the BIM process. I mentioned the functionality of building management system. I've already had experience of coming back from post-occupancy evaluations, and these things don't just happen. Somebody actually has to catalyse a meeting where the facilities people come and talk to the procurement people, talk to the BMS people, so that you actually actively have that feedback incorporated into the next design process. Otherwise, again, it withers on the vine. We have had specific BIM design workshops to embrace zoning control and the technical operation of heat and light, because the designers will design a zoning which isn't necessarily how best the users want to actually interface with that particular aspect of the M&E. And then BIM, we have defined, is the mechanism that didn't exist before for plugging in feedback, and this includes post-occupancy reports as well as feedback, because you don't necessarily have to do an involved post-occupancy report to feedback into the process, and BIM is the vehicle that didn't exist before. So I said I would talk very briefly about how this interfaces with the current government initiative. In 2011, the UK government included in their strategy a requirement that was mandatory for level 2 BIM. I won't go into what the definition of level 2 BIM is. That's perhaps the subject for another webinar in the future. But in essence, it was to drive reduction in costs and carbon by a figure of up to 15 to 20%. And BIM was going to be one of the mechanisms for doing that, not the only one. The government isn't interested in the detail. It's the end result that they're aiming for. And they set up a task group which is under the wing of the CIC, and there's a core team, and David Philp is a member, Mark Bew is a member, and I know David has done some conferences and webinars, and he is Scottish and based in Edinburgh, I think he's based, is he? Yeah. And one or two other members of the core team, and then there is a BIM task group made up of about half a dozen support officers, and I've mentioned I am one of those. And in order to have a unified definition of what BIM is, the definition that the task group is using, so I'll toe the party line and put it on the screen here. It's a collection of value creating best practices underpinned by a culture of collaboration and exchange of structured asset data. So it doesn't mention processes or technology or people, but it encapsulates all of them, and it's based on a whole life, whole estate approach. Now, also within the government strategy was the policy of government soft landings. And earlier on in my presentation, I mentioned soft landings, which was basically, it was a government commissioned report, and it was undertaken by BISRIA. And basically, at that time, they concentrated in the 6 months before and after handover, which was laudable because we weren't paying enough attention to getting an understanding of what people were going to receive in terms of the building and the way it operated. And then what we used to do was hand over the keys, see you later when you commission another project, and we leave people to their own devices. And a building is a complicated structure, so people really need to know a little bit more about how it was built and how the mechanisms operate. So originally the government the soft landings was to smooth out that handover and familiarization process. Now, because that contains 80% of the requirements, in order to differentiate the new government soft landings, they've simply added the word government at the front, because they've incorporated the BISRIA requirements, but then they've also gone on to say you must also do, and I've highlighted a couple of them here, early engagement of end user and inclusion of government soft landings in the project team for the design and construction process, a commitment to aftercare post-construction from the design and construction. Now that's a big thing, commitment to aftercare. It isn't just the 12-month defects liability, which is included in the contracts usually anyway. It's going beyond that so that people don't just cut and run and leave people to their own devices. There's got to be a post-occupancy evaluation and feedback into the design and construction team and lessons learned for future projects. And the government has said that it will be mandated in 2016 for all centrally government procured projects, much as the government construction strategy says that publicly procured projects will be at level 2 BIM by 2016. That is the target. What we have to do really is live with the levels of maturity and understanding in the industry currently to get to that utopian position. But there's been some really good feedback and benefits from that. I did have a word with somebody, apologies, I can't remember his name. I think his Christian name was Ben, and he had done or participated in the Scottish government construction strategy. And at the moment they don't specify BIM, and I don't think soft landings, but they are watching how it goes in England so that they can consider it for inclusion in the next strategy. So they watching this space with interest. So government soft landings is aligning design and construction with operation and asset management. I mean, these things sound self-evident. Why should there not be a continuity? But there isn't. It's based on the BISRIA framework. And I've hijacked some of the government soft landings slides here. So I'm just reiterating what is a government initiative. One of my colleagues in the task group has been around doing this presentation. So I won't go through all the words there. It will be available for you. So it's in use and aftercare between 1 and 3 years. And the output, the government soft landings policy is been agreed and it's mandated in alignment with level 2 by 2016. Again, I won't go into the core elements of soft landings or the BISRIA soft landings because the slide is available for you to look at, but fairly self-evident and obvious things that we ought to be doing. And the government is justifying the front-end value of government soft landings because if you get early in a project, the decisions have enormous leverage on the outcomes achieved. So we're not talking about using BIM, government soft landings, to do better the way we do things now in the construction industry. We're trying to change the process, essentially to bring a lot more of the serious decision-making process further forward, so that we go to the field to build these things with a design that's already as problem-free as we will ever be able to make it in the human environment. The government has speculated that the cost of maintaining a building is 3 times more than the construction cost. I've seen figures up to 200 times the construction cost. I think people pluck them out of the air, but it's self-evident that it costs more for a long-term maintenance than it does to build the thing in the first place. It enables the performance of users to actually understand that they may be burdened with operating costs, so it's in their interest to input into the design and understand how best to use it. And as time passes through the design and construction phase, the ability to influence the design and the cost of the influencing of the design rises. So early engagement with government soft landings pays dividends. And then there are some examples of why the government thinks early engagement with the facilities management will provide benefits. And again, this presentation is not about BIM, so I'll let you have a look at those slides and understand the significance of them. I will just reiterate that we talk about BIM as though the market were already mature and we can immediately start taking advantage of these potential benefits, whereas there's a way to go before we actually have created an environment in which we can even hope to benefit from some of the advantages. So perhaps in the future I might be extended an invitation to talk about BIM. That's the summary slide from the government soft landings, and I think almost like I planned it, I'm going to finish bang on time with the alignment with government soft landings. Our POEs are currently work in progress. We're undertaking post-occupancy evaluations, and there's a kind of slow but growing uptake of requirement for post-occupancies within our own organisation. And once people have recognised that I can do it, I'm getting solicited from external organisations what are the mechanics of doing something for them. The independence is guaranteed by the University of Reading, so that I put everything that I pick up, so I'm not putting too much of a construction slant on it. Engaging with facilities management, who are the people who really know how a building's performing in the future. We've connected it to BIM. We've closed up the feedback loop, which didn't exist before, into the briefing, and we're engaging the users who have the intimate knowledge of the projects. I rest my case and thank you very much for listening. Hope it wasn't death by PowerPoint.
Okay, thank you very much, Howard. Well, I would like to encourage our online viewers to start asking questions, but I have also prepared some in advance for you. Looking into the range of stakeholders who you have to ask about their views about the performance of the building, I was thinking, well, you have the occupiers, you have building managers, you have owners, you also might have community around the building affected by what's going on in the building. So, and all of them have different interests, primary interests. For occupants, it's probably comfort. For building managers, how efficiently the building performs. For owners, how much they will pay for different costs, and so on. Do you capture, how do you capture all that in post-occupancy evaluation? Do you invite them all to these meetings? as attendees that can contribute, or do you undertake surveys? How do you go about undertaking post-occupancy evaluation?
I wouldn't claim we're able to engage all those people. The wider community, in an example such as a school or a hospital, we do invite either patient advisory groups. There are even visitor advisory groups. With schools, there are parent spokespeople. So on the school projects, for example, we have invited people who represent parents' organisations, and they bring issues like when the school bus comes, it's too far away from the school to be able to get the kids safely on it. I do invite as many people as possible who are using the building either permanently or temporarily. There might be visitors or there might be occasional users. They might be the people maintaining the building. They might be the owner of the building who never sets foot in the building, and they still have a view. And that's part of the priming meeting, where we establish an agenda and a scope for the meeting, because there's always going to be more that you could do, and people have a finite amount of time, and there's a finite budget on these things. So we try and extend it as far as we reasonably can, given the agreed scope and limitations of that particular project.
So how much time does it take? I suppose you have also to collect information about energy performance or other type of performance, and with all these interviews, how much time do you need to undertake evaluation of, let's say, one school or a hospital?
That depends on the scope, because there is a hierarchy, really. Some people would like something doing, so I think of it as a cheap and cheerful one, and it amounts to a couple of weeks of time, and that's to orchestrate, that's to engage, that's to do the report. And a ballpark figure really for one of those is around about £5,000, because you have to get people to set up the report, and some people would like a hard copy print, etc., etc. And then there's one which is rather more involved, which again, depending on the location, is around about 9,000 to 10,000. It may take three weeks to do. And then if you want a broader scope, the sky's the limit, really. So those two usually capture what most people will want out of it. Just remind me of the other part of the other one was the energy. I don't necessarily have to get involved with the energy performance. We have a separate part of the organisation, because we're responsible for the design on the buildings that we've done. They go and do an energy analysis, and I have to say, if there aren't too many issues with it, I can append that to my post-occupancy report. If, for example, there are some really sensitive issues, like the building is using 5 times more energy than was originally designed, it's very, very emotive, and there may be very, very good reasons why that's happening. For example, you've designed a building to be used for 8 hours a day, and you find that they're using it 24 hours a day, and there are far many more people in it than were ever designed for, and you have to follow that thread through to come up with an explanation as to why it's 5 times less efficient than it should be. And usually you find that the design criteria are okay. It's the use of the building. So I have to be very, very careful when it comes to energy analysis. But that leaves a lot of other things that we can cover.
Here is a question from one of our online viewers. Have you worked on any POE in domestic dwellings?
I personally haven't, because it isn't a market really that Skanska have moved into in any big way. We have recently developed some residential dwellings in Cambridgeshire, so it is my intention to approach them to do a post-occupancy evaluation, So at the moment the answer is no, but there is no reason why I would not do that. And I think the principles are probably the same. The size of the stakeholder range, I guess, would be much smaller. You would be talking to individual householders, perhaps the owners of a residential block. So I think the principles would still be the same. I've no doubt that we would find as much useful information in doing residential. So it isn't a conscious avoidance of it, it's just that I haven't had the opportunity as yet to do it.
Do you think that post-occupancy evaluation could be of interest to property buyers in the same way as energy performance certificates are now becoming of interest to property buyers?
Of course, I would liken that to when you buy a car. If you go to a garage and they haven't got the service history, you're going to be a little bit nervous about what the history of that car is. If you are looking to invest in a building and there is a review on its performance and there's evidence that any issues that have arisen have been addressed, or at least it puts into your mind what you could usefully address to enhance the building, I think it has potential, because it depends what you're buying the building for. If you're buying the building to rent out to people, if you can demonstrate that you've reviewed the building and it's as good as a building as you're going to get, you can charge a premium for the rent. You can get the very best clients in who recognise if it's on their agenda for supporting the environment, if you've done things, and there are all sorts of things that you can do with the services to reduce the energy consumption. All that is going to be of an advantage to a potential buyer. So yeah, the answer is yes.
And do the building clients see the value, understand the value of POE, especially large building clients who have repeated commissions?
Yes, they do. I think I've mentioned a couple of times that some of these principles are fairly self-evident. It's obvious. Why wouldn't you try and learn from it? But it isn't until somebody's got something that they can demonstrate. Here is one that we did. Here are the things that we found. That people with an estate, I mean, some owners have thousands of buildings on their estate. And in fact, halfway through a commission, because Skanska rent a property from somebody who has a portfolio of 1,000 offices throughout the country, and they're really interested in following through and maybe doing some more exemplar projects on their estate.
It is also interesting what you highlighted about the link between POE and BIM. The way you see that the result of post-occupancy evaluation would feed in building information management system. So could we see BIM also as a knowledge management tool, which is collecting this knowledge from post-evaluation studies and bringing it forward into the tool that can be used in future by designers?
I certainly think there is the potential for that. I think any industry that has a large number of people and experience across a wide range of things has already identified the difficulty of knowledge transfer between individuals, because first of all you have to know that they've got the information. It has to be available at the time they need it. There has to be a mechanism for delivering it, and certainly within our own organisation I'm trying to push the BIM process as the vehicle for these transfer of lessons learned, and you can incorporate some of the lessons learned into the database which is part of the BIM process. You can also link it into standardization of designs, so that once you've got a design which works, you have automatically excluded design flaws and incorporate what is then current best practice. There's always got to be maintaining the currency of these things, but yes, BIM is a vehicle for transfer of lessons learned. I have every confidence.
Mm-hmm. The government will require the use of BIM by 2016 on its public procured buildings. Will it also support some learning or training of people who need to know more about BIM to be able to use it?
Well, the government is doing that now. The very fact that there is a BIM task group is evidence of that. However, it is limited. Everything is finite. There's a backdrop of government cuts. They have sponsored, I think, the BIM task group for up until 2016, although it may change at the next election, so which is 2015, I think. So they are supporting, catalysing the clients, first of all, to understand what BIM is and to start asking the right questions to move the world forward. Whether that continues after 2016, I suspect the government hasn't decided yet. It depends on how effective the uptake has been up until 2016, and certainly in the area that I've been working in, there is definite uptake of the initiative simply because people in the supply chain are now being asked specifically for things that they could always have supplied but had never been asked to, and that's a great start. Making that compatible with whatever the modelling and the processes are is probably the next step. There'll be incompatibility, there will simply be learning. You've asked for this information, but you should have asked for it in this format. And there's going to be, I've described it as a transition period from what people describe now, which some people think is already available. However, there's going to be a practical transition period where we can create pockets of excellence and gradually move forward on a broad front. And I think the government has recognised that it's such a significant potential in savings that they would continue to support it. Although I can't say.
How important it is really then to have courses in higher education on BIM, and also continuous professional development courses for everyone working in practice who wishes to learn about BIM?
I think that's a very good point, actually. I know some universities have started to do master's courses in BIM, but that's usually educating students into the process and perhaps the utilisation of various technologies that are out there. But there is a huge gulf between the levels of understanding across the board within the industry, and I I would hazard a guess that still in the industry some people have not really even heard of BIM and understood what it is. So you've got some people who've yet to understand what it is, and I think some people have heard about it and made a decision as to what they think it is, and that might be wrong, because there are a lot of technology software salespeople out there selling a solution to problems which people haven't yet identified. So you're actually at a minus point, and you've got to bring people up to the 0 point to say, well, actually that's not quite right, your understanding, it's more this, and then they can start moving forward. So I think there is great potential throughout the universities to have awareness days, information days, conferences, all that kind of thing that will help with just disseminating the message.
We have a question from a researcher at Edinburgh Napier University. How do you relate energy evaluation of the building with occupants of building? How is the energy evaluation done? Which also links to something that I wanted to ask about how human behavior influences the results of post-occupancy evaluation, including energy evaluation.
Well, I'll try and answer that question as best I can. One of the methodologies on the slide was TM22, which one of my colleagues from the we have an M&E design part of the company. It's called Skanska Rashley Weatherfoil, and he has the remit on a regular basis to go and monitor the energy consumption of the building. Now, I haven't been with him. it would probably benefit me to go and do one with him actually, so I can answer this question a little bit more from a practical experience. I do know what he did say was the criteria against which he measures are actually more stringent than TM22, because we have contractual obligations under a number of the PFI schemes to ensure that the energy consumption certainly falls within a certain category. So I probably can't answer the second part of your question with a great deal of authority, but I know he takes the electric and gas consumption figures, he takes the temperatures in various parts of the building, makes sure that they are performing to within the criteria, and there are other external factors which influence that. If it's particularly cold for a prolonged period, or if it's particularly hot for a prolonged period, you can actually still be outside the bounds of the design criteria because of these almost force majeures. But as long as it doesn't go too far outside the parameters for too long, then we are meeting the energy requirements. Not sure if I can answer much more in terms of that, but I'll go with him next time, and then I can give a more full answer with perhaps some detailed information. The other part to the question was, Branka, how do you engage with the users and change their culture? That again is probably a subject in its own right. I honestly don't think people set out to behave badly. In a hospital, for example, I did come up to Scotland and we heard a presentation from somebody on the NHS Scotland, and I asked the question about the internal environment and the answer at that time was, these people are here to tend to patients and save lives, some of them. The last thing they want to be bothering to think about is, have they switched the lights off, and that kind of thing. So there is, I suppose, an optimum sweet spot, and it will depend on the use of the building and the nature of the occupancy of the building, where you can use technology to do most of the hard work in relation to supporting a sustainable environment. But then people are people, they like to have a little bit of control over the system, and I bet you 9 times out of 10, if you just put a dummy thermostat in some of the rooms, that would take care of a lot of the issues. But then there are real issues where people do have to alter the temperature or the light. So I think we've a way to go before we've optimized automatic controls.
We don't have any more questions. Well, maybe we can wrap up now the webinar with maybe some last messages you would like to say in relation to this topic, maybe in relation to your future work or the research that you think that is required, or how you see the relationship between post-occupancy evaluation and BIM will develop in future. So just final words as a conclusion of your webinar.
Yeah, certainly. I think we've only just scratched the surface. I think it's been an eye-opener to the people who participated in the projects, just how easy it is. Some very, very useful information that you can take forward onto even designs that are still on the drawing board. I know on the schools, when we invited some of the facilities management people, the feedback from the users was immediate. They went straight back to a school that was being constructed and were able to beneficially influence the design simply because it was so similar. And I think it's a case of watch this space in terms of feeding the results of post-occupancy into our BIM execution plans. I have been able to do it on some of the projects now which are on the drawing board, so there is a BIM execution plan. It does say you will review post-occupancy evaluation reports, but then it requires somebody to read that and then do it. So I think that there's going to have to be a finger on the pulse where I go and just ask them, what did you do with that information? I think the very fact that somebody's going to come and ask them will mean they will do it. So, but again, I don't have that experience yet, because the commissions I've done have only been over the last year or two, and sometimes the design on projects is quite a long gestation period. But I think the more people that you engage who recognise the value of it, especially because the government's mandated it, so people will start to ask for it without really knowing what they're asking for. And I think one of the things, because we've been looking at this for the last eight years certainly, we will have a commodity which we will be able to offer to the market, which I think would be a useful outcome for Skanska in the scheme of things. So it's hopefully ramping up more of what we've been able to do.
Thank you very much, Howard, for your presentation. And I would like now to draw attention of our online viewers to our forthcoming webinars. There is one tomorrow on the future for electric storage heating, and the speakers are Katalin Svehla and Simon Gill of University of Strathclyde. And then on 25th of March, we have a webinar entitled Towards Community Energy Solutions in Linlithgow. And we will have speakers from Transition Linlithgow, Chris Cook, then from University of Aberdeen, Mohamed Ibabi, and from University of Aberdeen, Dundee, David Blackwood and Ruth Falcona. This webinar will present one feasibility study that has been completed and one pilot project, and they are all related to more sustainable development of Linlithgow. So I would like to invite you to watch that webinar, because it will show what has been achieved through this project, and also where we are going in future in relation to development of the project. So please look places online, and thank you very much for watching this webinar. Thank you.